The shotgun blast echoed across the canyon just as Rowan Mercer stepped out of the church. Not a celebration, a warning. 40 years of blood, burned land, and broken bones, and they thought a wedding ring could end it? The Hales and Mercers had killed each other's cattle, poisoned each other's wells, and buried each other's sons. Now here she stood, married to a man whose grandfather had shot hers dead in broad daylight. Everett Hale didn't flinch at the gunfire. He just turned those cold gray eyes toward the hills and said one word: home. This wasn't love. This was a ceasefire written in vows neither of them believed in. But before this night ends, one of them will have to decide: stand together or let the feud finally burn them both to ash. Stick with me through this whole story. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. Hit that like button. You won't believe where this goes. The desert didn't care about weddings. It swallowed the hymns, turned the white lace gray with dust, and baked the wooden pews until they cracked beneath the weight of people who hadn't sat together in decades. The church at Copper Ridge wasn't built for forgiveness. It was built for funerals. And judging by the faces in the crowd, most people figured this ceremony was just a prelude to one. Rowan Mercer stood at the back of the aisle, alone. No father to walk her forward. No mother dabbing tears in the front row. Just her, a borrowed dress that didn't fit right, and a choice she couldn't take back. She didn't believe in fate, didn't believe in salvation, and she sure as hell didn't believe the man waiting at the altar gave a damn about her. But she believed in survival. And right now, survival meant walking toward Everett Hale, like her life depended on it, because it did. The dress was heavy, suffocating. Someone's grandmother had pulled it from a trunk that smelled like camphor and regret. It didn't matter. Rowan wasn't here to look pretty. She was here to end a war she'd been born into, one that had already taken too much. Her boots, scuffed, practical, hidden beneath the hem, hit the floor in steady rhythm. She didn't look at the guests, didn't acknowledge the Mercers on the left or the Hales on the right, all sitting like opposing armies at a truce nobody trusted. She kept her eyes forward, on him. Everett Hale stood at the altar like a man carved from stone. Tall, broad-shouldered, expression unreadable. He didn't smile, didn't offer her any reassurance. His jaw was set, his hands loose at his sides, and his eyes, those unsettling gray eyes, tracked her approach with the same calm intensity he'd used to watch a storm roll in. No warmth, no nerves. Just waiting. Rowan's chest tightened, but she didn't slow down. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was a contract. The preacher cleared his throat as she stopped beside Everett. He smelled like leather and smoke, like a man who spent more time with horses than people. He didn't look at her, just stared straight ahead, shoulders squared, like he was bracing for impact. "Dearly beloved," the preacher's voice cracked. He was old, too old to be standing in the middle of this disaster. But he was the only neutral party left in Copper Ridge, and that made him valuable. "We are gathered here today." A chair scraped. Rowan's spine stiffened. She didn't turn, but she felt it, the ripple of tension that moved through the room like a living thing. Someone on the Mercer side had moved. Someone on the Hale side shifted in response. The preacher's hand shook as he flipped through the worn Bible. To join this man and this woman. Another sound. A cough. A boot heel against wood. It was like watching a fuse burn. Everett's hand moved, not fast, not aggressive. Just a slight shift, his fingers brushing the edge of his coat. Rowan caught the movement in her peripheral vision and understood immediately. He was armed, of course he was. So was half the room. "In holy matrimony." The preacher rushed now, words tumbling over each other. He wasn't stupid. He knew what kind of powder keg he was standing on. Rowan's pulse hammered in her ears, but she kept her face blank. Survival meant control. Survival meant not showing fear, even when your knees wanted to buckle. "Do you, Everett James Hale, take this woman?" "I do." His voice cut through the room like a blade. Deep, steady, no hesitation. Rowan blinked. She'd expected him to hesitate, expected him to drag it out, to make some silent protest that this whole thing was a mistake. But he didn't. He just stood there, looking at her now, waiting. The preacher turned to her, sweat beading on his forehead. "Do you, Rowan Elizabeth Mercer, take this man?" She opened her mouth, and the shotgun blast tore through the air. The room exploded. Not with gunfire, though plenty of hands went to holsters, But with shouts, curses, the scrape of chairs as people lunged to their feet, Rowan's heart slammed into her ribs, but she didn't move, didn't flinch. Everett did. He stepped in front of her, not close, not protective in any romantic sense, just a single, deliberate step that put his body between her and the door. "Outside!" someone yelled. "It came from outside!" Men shoved toward the exit, voices rising in a cacophony of blame and suspicion. "That was a Mercer gun." "Like hell it was." "Probably one of you Hales trying to—" Everett's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. "Sit. Down." It wasn't loud, but it carried. The room stilled. Heads turned, eyes fixed on him. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pull his gun. He just stood there, immovable, his gaze sweeping the crowd with the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "Nobody leaves," he said quietly. "We finish this." A Mercer man, Rowan recognized him as one of her cousins, sneered. "Finish what? This joke of a wedding?" Everett's expression didn't change. "You walked in here for a reason. You'll walk out the same way, or you won't walk out at all." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Rowan's cousin sat down. So did the others. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd settled. The preacher looked like he might pass out, but he picked up his Bible with trembling hands. Everett turned back to Rowan. Their eyes met. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his expression, something that wasn't quite concern, but wasn't indifference either. He nodded once. She exhaled. "Continue," Everett said to the preacher. The old man swallowed hard. "Do you, Rowan Elizabeth Mercer?" "I do." Her voice didn't shake. The preacher fumbled for the rings, simple bands, nothing fancy, and blessed them with shaking hands. Everett took hers first, slid it onto her finger with the same clinical precision he'd used to fix a fence. Then Rowan took his. His hand was rough, calloused, warm. She slid the ring on. "I now pronounce you man and wife." No one applauded. No one cheered. The preacher didn't even say the part about kissing. He just closed his Bible and stepped back like he couldn't get away fast enough. Everett looked at Rowan. She looked back. "Let's go," he said, and without another word he turned and walked down the aisle. Rowan followed. The ranch house sat at the base of the canyon like a fortress. It wasn't grand, wasn't beautiful, just functional, stone and timber, built to last, surrounded by miles of scrub and dust and wire fences that divided Hale land from Mercer land like a scar across the earth. Everett's truck rattled over the dirt road, the silence between them heavy as iron. Rowan stared out the window, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The desert turned gold, then red, then purple, beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, like everything else here. "You'll have the east bedroom," Everett said finally. She glanced at him. "Not yours?" His jaw tightened. "No?" Of course not. This wasn't a real marriage. It was a business arrangement, a desperate attempt by two families to stop the bloodshed before there was no one left to bury. She didn't know why she'd expected anything different. "Fine," she said. They pulled up to the house. Everett killed the engine, climbed out without a word, and grabbed her single bag from the truck bed. Rowan followed him inside. The house was clean but sparse. No photographs, no decorations, just the essentials: furniture, a wood stove, shelves lined with books, and ammunition in equal measure. He set her bag down by a narrow staircase. "Kitchen's through there, bathrooms upstairs. Water's limited, so don't waste it." "I know how a ranch works," Rowan said. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment something unreadable passed across his face. "I'm sure you do," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked toward the back of the house, his boots heavy on the floorboards. Rowan stood alone in the dim entryway, the weight of the ring on her finger suddenly very real. She'd married a stranger, a man whose family had destroyed hers, and now she was supposed to live here, work here, survive here. She climbed the stairs, found the east bedroom, small, plain, with a single window overlooking the canyon, and sat on the edge of the bed. The shotgun blast still echoed in her mind, a warning or a promise. She didn't know which. Morning came fast and unforgiving. Rowan woke to the sound of boots on the porch, the low murmur of men's voices, the clang of metal on metal. She dressed quickly, jeans, boots, a shirt she'd brought from home, and went downstairs. Everett was already gone. But there was coffee on the stove, still warm. She poured herself a cup and stepped outside. The ranch was alive with movement, horses in the corral, hands mending fences, cattle lowing in the distance, and Everett standing near the barn, talking to an older man with a weathered face and a skeptical expression. The man saw her first. His eyes narrowed. Everett turned. For a moment their gazes locked. Then he said something to the man and started toward her. "You're up early," he said. "I'm used to early." He nodded. "Good. We've got work." "What kind of work?" "The kind that keeps this place running." He didn't wait for a response, just handed her a pair of gloves and started walking. Rowan followed. They worked in silence, mending fences, moving cattle, hauling water. It was brutal, exhausting labor, and Rowan refused to slow down, refused to ask for breaks, refused to give anyone, especially Everett, a reason to doubt her. The ranch hands watched her like hawks. She ignored them. By midday, her hands were blistered, her back ached, and sweat soaked through her shirt. Everett worked beside her, never slowing, never stopping. He didn't speak unless necessary, didn't offer help unless she asked, just matched her pace, step for step, like he was testing her. Fine. She'd passed the test. When the sun finally started to sink, Everett called it. "That's enough for today." Rowan straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Tomorrow?" she asked. He looked at her, something almost like approval flickering in his eyes. "Tomorrow," he confirmed. Dinner was simple. Bread, stew, more silence. Rowan ate quickly, exhaustion pulling at her bones. Everett sat across from her, his expression unreadable. "You did good today," he said finally. She looked up, surprised. "Don't sound so shocked," he added, the corner of his mouth twitching. Not quite a smile, but close. "I'm not," she said. "I just didn't think you'd notice." "I notice everything." The way he said it, low, certain, sent a strange shiver down her spine. She looked away. "Get some rest," Everett said, standing. "Tomorrow's harder." He left the kitchen without another word. Rowan sat alone, staring at the empty chair across from her. This was her life now. A stranger's house, a stranger's land, a stranger she'd tied herself to for better or worse. She didn't know if she could trust him, didn't know if he could trust her. But she knew one thing for certain. The feud wasn't over. And the real fight hadn't even started yet. 3 days passed in a blur of work and silence. Rowan learned the rhythm of the ranch. Early mornings, long days, short nights. She learned which hands respected her and which ones didn't. She learned where the fences were weakest, where the water ran cleanest, where the cattle liked to wander. And she learned Everett, not through words, he didn't offer many, but through action. The way he checked the gates twice before locking them. The way he always took the hardest jobs himself. The way he never asked her to do anything he wouldn't do. He was fair, steady, reliable, but distant. Always distant. On the 4th morning, everything changed. Rowan was checking the southern fence line when she saw it. Cattle. Dozens of them. On Hale land, wearing Mercer brands. Her blood went cold. She spurred her horse forward, heart pounding, and rode along the fence. It had been cut, deliberately, cleanly. Someone had driven the cattle through, then left the wire tangled in the dirt like a taunt. Rowan's hands shook as she dismounted. This wasn't an accident. This was sabotage. And she knew exactly who'd done it. Up. She found Everett near the barn, shoeing a horse. "We've got a problem," she said. He looked up, reading her expression instantly. "Show me." They rode in silence, Rowan leading the way. When they reached the fence, Everett dismounted and crouched beside the cut wire. His face went hard. "Mercer cattle," he said quietly. "I know." "On my land." "I know." He stood, his jaw tight. This was deliberate. "I know." His eyes snapped to hers. "Do you know who did it?" Rowan's throat tightened. She did. Her brother. Caleb Mercer. Hot-headed, reckless, still clinging to the feud like a lifeline. He'd done this to prove a point, to remind everyone that a marriage wouldn't change anything. "I have an idea," she said carefully. Everett studied her, his gaze sharp. "And?" "And I'll handle it." "Like hell you will." She stiffened. "He's my family." And this is my land. Everett's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. You want to handle it? Fine. But I'm coming with you. No. Yes. They stared at each other, tension crackling between them. I can fix this, Rowan said, without starting another war. Can you? She didn't answer. Everett stepped closer, not threatening, just present. You ride onto Mercer land alone, he said quietly, and they'll see it as weakness or betrayal. Either way, you lose. And if you come with me, then they see it as what it is, a united front. Rowan shook her head. That'll make it worse. Maybe. Or maybe it'll make them think twice. She wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could do this herself, but deep down, she knew he was right. Fine, she said. Tomorrow morning, we go together. Everett nodded. And for the first time since they'd met, Rowan felt something shift between them. Not trust. Not yet. But the beginning of it. That night, Rowan couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, staring out at the dark canyon, her mind racing. Tomorrow, she'd have to face her family. She'd have to stand beside Everett and defend a choice most of them saw as treason. She didn't know if she was strong enough. A soft knock on her door startled her. It's open, she said. Everett stepped inside, his expression unreadable. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. No. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. I can handle it alone. Rowan turned to face him. Yes, I do. Why? Because if I don't, they'll never respect this marriage. They'll never stop testing us. Everett's gaze held hers. And you care about that? She hesitated. Did she? A week ago, she would have said no, but now. I care about surviving, she said finally, and that means making this work. Everett nodded slowly. Then we make it work, he said, and without another word, he turned and left. Rowan stood alone in the dark, her heart pounding. Tomorrow, she'd find out what she was really made of, and so would everyone else. Dawn broke cold and sharp. Rowan dressed in silence, pulling on her sturdiest boots, her warmest jacket. She met Everett at the barn. He was already saddled, his rifle strapped to his horse. You armed? He asked. She patted her hip. Always. He nodded. Good. Stay close. Don't start anything, but if it starts, don't hesitate. I know the rules. They rode out together, side by side, into the rising sun. The Mercer Ranch sat on the other side of the canyon, sprawling, chaotic, pieced together over decades of stubborn survival. As they approached, Rowan saw them. Her family. Her brother. Caleb stood on the porch, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. Well, well, he called. Look who came crawling back. Rowan's hands tightened on the reins. Everett said nothing. They dismounted in unison, walking forward together. Caleb's smirk faded. You brought him here? He said, his voice sharp. To our land? This isn't about sides anymore, Caleb, Rowan said. You cut the fence. You drove cattle onto Hale land. You started this. I didn't start anything, Caleb spat. This feud's been going since before we were born. You think marrying him changes that? It's supposed to. Well, it doesn't. Everett stepped forward. Caleb's hand went to his gun. Don't, Rowan said sharply. Caleb's eyes flicked to her. You really going to choose him over your own blood? I'm choosing peace, she said. Something you've never cared about. Peace, Caleb laughed bitterly. There's no peace with a Hale. There never will be. Everett's voice cut through the tension. Then I guess you've got a choice to make, he said quietly. Keep fighting a war that'll kill you, or step back and let it end. Caleb's jaw clenched. The two men stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken violence. And then Caleb stepped back, just one step. But it was enough. Fix your fence, he said coldly, and keep your cattle off our land. They're your cattle, Rowan said. You drove them there. Prove it. He turned and walked back into the house, slamming the door behind him. Rowan exhaled, her whole body shaking with adrenaline. Everett touched her arm, brief, steadying. Let's go, he said. They rode back in silence, but this time the silence felt different, like they'd survived something together. And that meant something. Over the next 2 weeks, Rowan worked harder than she ever had in her life. She mended every broken fence, moved every stray head of cattle, proved to Everett's ranch hands and to herself that she belonged here. Everett watched, and slowly, imperceptibly, the distance between them began to close. He started asking her opinion on things, started trusting her judgment. They fell into a rhythm, working side by side, eating meals together, sitting on the porch at dusk without needing to fill the silence. It wasn't love, but it was partnership. And in a place like Copper Ridge, that was worth more than gold. One evening, as they sat watching the stars, Everett spoke. "You didn't have to come back that day," he said. "When your brother cut the fence, you could have let me handle it." "I know." "But you didn't." Rowan looked at him. "No, I didn't." "Why?" She thought about it. "Because this is my fight too," she said finally. "And I don't run from fights." Everett's mouth curved just barely. "Good," he said. And for the first time, Rowan felt something that might have been hope. The feud wasn't over, but maybe, just maybe, they could survive it, together. 3 weeks into the marriage, the first storm hit. Not rain, though the desert could have used it. This storm came in the form of a man on horseback, riding hard across the boundary line at dawn, his face twisted with fury. Rowan saw him first. She'd been checking the water troughs near the eastern pasture when the thunder of hooves pulled her attention to the ridge. She recognized the rider immediately. Marcus Hale, Everett's uncle, a man whose hatred for the Mercers ran so deep it had carved lines into his face like canyon walls. He wasn't supposed to be here. Everett had made that clear at the wedding. Certain family members were to stay away, to give this fragile piece a chance to take root. Marcus hadn't listened. Rowan's hand went to the rifle strapped to her saddle, but she didn't pull it. Not yet. Instead, she spurred her horse forward, intercepting him before he could reach the main house. "You're on the wrong side of the fence," she called out. Marcus reined his horse to a halt, his eyes raking over her with unconcealed contempt. "I'm on Hale land. Last I checked, that gives me more right to be here than you." "Last you checked was before the wedding." "Wedding," he spat the word like poison. "That farce doesn't change what you are. You're still a Mercer, still the enemy." Rowan kept her voice level, though her pulse hammered in her throat. "I'm Everett's wife, which means I'm family now, whether you like it or not." Marcus laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think a ring makes you family? You think it erases 40 years of blood? Your grandfather killed my brother, shot him in the back like a coward. And your father burned my family's barn with our horses still inside," Rowan shot back. "We can trade atrocities all day, Marcus. It won't change anything." His jaw clenched. "Where's Everett?" "Not here." "Then I'll wait." "No, you won't." Marcus's hand drifted toward his belt, where a pistol sat holstered. Rowan's fingers tightened on her reins, her body coiled and ready. "You threatening me, girl." "I'm telling you to leave." "Or what?" The voice came from behind her, low and deadly calm. "Or you answer to me." Rowan didn't turn, but relief flooded through her. Everett. He must have seen Marcus coming from the house. Marcus's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been uncertainty, but it hardened again just as quickly. "Everett, good. We need to talk." "No, we don't." Everett rode up beside Rowan, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "I told you to stay away. This is family business." "And she's family," Everett interrupted, "which means whatever you have to say you can say in front of her, or you can leave." Marcus's face reddened. "You're choosing her over your own blood?" "I'm choosing peace over stupidity. If you can't respect that, then yeah, I'm choosing her." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Rowan's breath caught. She hadn't expected that, hadn't expected him to defend her so plainly, so publicly. Marcus stared at his nephew, anger and betrayal warring in his expression. "Your father would be ashamed." "My father's dead," Everett said quietly. "And if he were here, he'd tell you the same thing I am. This feud ends with us, one way or another." For a long moment, Marcus didn't move. Then he yanked his horse's reins, turning the animal sharply. "You'll regret this," he said, "both of you." He rode off, dust rising in his wake. Rowan exhaled slowly, her hands trembling slightly on the reins. She'd faced down plenty of men before, but something about Marcus's hatred had felt different, more personal, more dangerous. Everett watched until his uncle disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded. "I had it handled." "I know you did." His gaze held hers. "But you don't have to handle everything alone anymore." Something shifted in her chest, unfamiliar, unsettling. "Thank you," she said quietly. Everett nodded once, then rode toward the house without another word. Rowan followed, her mind churning. He'd stood up for her, publicly sided with her over his own family. That meant something, it had to. But trust was still a fragile thing between them, built on shared work and mutual necessity rather than affection, and she knew better than to mistake solidarity for something deeper. Still, as she dismounted near the barn, she couldn't shake the memory of his words. "I'm choosing her." Maybe that was enough. For now. Nkimam. The ranch hands noticed the change before Rowan did. Over the next few days, they started watching her differently. Not with suspicion or resentment, but with something closer to respect. A few even nodded to her in passing, small gestures, but significant in a place where acceptance was earned, not given. Everett had shifted the balance by defending her, and the men who followed his lead in everything adjusted accordingly. Rowan didn't let it go to her head. She kept working, kept proving herself, kept her guard up. But she felt it, the subtle thaw in the air, the way conversations didn't stop when she walked into the barn, the way tasks were divided more evenly. She'd become part of the operation, not fully trusted maybe, but no longer an outsider. One afternoon, while she was helping two ranch hands repair a broken section of corral fence, one of them, a grizzled man named Tom who'd been with the Hales for 20 years, spoke to her directly for the first time. "You know how to splice wire?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yeah, my father taught me when I was 10. Tom grunted, handing her the pliers. "Show me." It was a test, she knew that. She knew. But she took the tools and worked quickly, efficiently, her hands steady despite the pressure of being watched. When she finished, Tom inspected the splice, running his fingers over the twisted wire. Then he nodded. "Good work." It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd gotten since arriving. Rowan allowed herself a small smile. "Thanks." Tom glanced toward the house, where Everett was talking to another worker. "Boss doesn't say much," he said quietly. "But when he does, we listen. He says you're solid. That's enough for me." Rowan's throat tightened. "He said that?" "More or less." Tom picked up his hammer. "Actions speak louder anyway. You pull your weight. That's what matters here." He walked off, leaving Rowan standing alone by the fence, something warm and unfamiliar spreading through her chest. Everett had vouched for her, not just to his uncle but to his men, to the people who kept this ranch running. She'd spent so long fighting to prove herself, fighting to survive, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone believe in her without needing constant proof. It was strange, uncomfortable, even, but not unwelcome. That evening, Rowan found Everett on the porch, sitting in one of the two worn wooden chairs, a cup of coffee in his hands. The sun was sinking fast, painting the canyon in shades of amber and rose. She hesitated in the doorway, then stepped outside. "Mind if I sit?" He glanced up, then nodded toward the empty chair. She sat, the silence between them comfortable now in a way it hadn't been weeks ago. The desert stretched out before them, vast and indifferent, but somehow it felt less lonely tonight. "Tom said you told the hands I was solid," Rowan said after a while. Everett took a sip of coffee. "You are. You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did." He set the cup down on the porch railing. "They needed to know where I stood and where you stood." "And where's that?" He looked at her then, his gray eyes steady in the fading light. "Here, with me." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Not a declaration of love. Everett wasn't the type for flowery speeches, but a statement of fact, a boundary drawn, a line in the dust that said she belonged on his side of it. Rowan swallowed hard. "Your uncle won't let this go." "I know. He'll try to cause trouble, sabotage the ranch, turn people against us." "Let him try." There was no bravado in Everett's voice, just quiet certainty. He'd made his choice, and he'd see it through, consequences be damned. Rowan admired that, envied it even. She'd spent her whole life second-guessing, looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Everett moved through the world like a man who knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked suddenly. "The marriage. You could have refused. Let the families keep fighting." Everett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Because I'm tired," he said finally. "Tired of burying friends, tired of fixing fences that get cut every other week, tired of looking over my shoulder every time I ride into town." He paused. "My father spent his whole life fighting the Mercers, and what did it get him? A bullet in the chest and an early grave." Rowan's breath caught. She hadn't known that, hadn't known how his father died. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Everett shook his head. "Don't be. It wasn't your fault. Just like it wasn't my fault when your cousin got shot in a dispute over water rights 3 years ago." He looked at her. "We've all lost people. We've all bled for this stupid feud. I figured it was time to try something different. Even if it meant marrying a stranger?" Even then, Rowan leaned back in her chair, processing his words. She'd assumed he'd been coerced, pressured by the elders or the town leaders desperate to end the violence. But he'd made the choice himself. A calculated risk, maybe, but a genuine one. "What about you?" Everett asked. "Why'd you say yes?" She considered lying, offering some noble reason about wanting peace or honoring her family's legacy, but something about the way he was looking at her, open, expectant, made her tell the truth. "Because I didn't have a choice," she said. "My family was falling apart. We'd lost too much land, too many people. If the fighting kept going, there wouldn't be anything left to fight for." She met his gaze. "I said yes because it was the only way to survive." Everett nodded slowly. "That's honest. Is that a problem?" "No." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "I prefer honest." They sat in silence as the stars began to emerge, scattered across the darkening sky like broken glass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely, haunting sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Rowan felt something shift between them. Not attraction, exactly, but understanding. A recognition that they were both doing the best they could with an impossible situation. "For what it's worth," Everett said quietly, "I think we're going to make it." "The ranch?" "The marriage." Rowan's heart stumbled. She looked at him, searching his face for mockery or doubt, but found neither, just quiet conviction. "What makes you so sure?" she asked. "Because we're both stubborn as hell," he said, "and neither of us knows how to quit." Despite herself, Rowan laughed, a short surprise sound that seemed to startle them both. Everett's smile widened just a fraction, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Rowan felt something that might have been hope. But hope was a dangerous thing in Copper Ridge, and it didn't take long for reality to come crashing back. 2 days later, one of the ranch hands found 3 head of cattle dead in the north pasture, poisoned. The water trough had been laced with something toxic, arsenic maybe, or something worse. Everett stood over the carcasses, his face carved from stone, the hands gathered around him, silent and grim. Rowan approached slowly, her stomach turning at the sight of the bloated, stiffened animals. Flies buzzed in thick clouds. The smell was nauseating. "Who found them?" Everett asked. A young hand named Danny stepped forward, his face pale. "Me, sir. This morning, just after dawn." "Anyone else been near this pasture?" "Not since yesterday." Everett crouched beside one of the dead cattle, examining the foam crusted around its mouth. This was deliberate. Rowan's chest tightened. "You think it was Marcus?" Could be someone else, doesn't matter." He stood, his jaw set. "Whoever did this wanted to send a message." "What kind of message?" Everett looked at her, his eyes hard. "That they're not done fighting." One of the older hands, a man named Ray, spat into the dirt. "We can't let this stand, boss. We hit back or they'll think we're weak." "Hitting back is what started this whole mess," Everett said sharply. "We're not doing that." Ray's face reddened. "So we just take it? Let them kill our stock and do nothing?" "I didn't say that." Everett's voice was ice cold now. "We respond, but we do it smart, not with bullets." "Then how?" Everett didn't answer. He just turned and walked toward his horse. Rowan followed. Everett, not now. He mounted and rode off toward the house, leaving her standing in the pasture with the dead cattle and the restless hands. She knew that look, that tight, controlled fury. He was planning something, and she needed to know what. She found him in the barn an hour later, saddling a fresh horse. His movements were efficient, methodical, but there was tension in every line of his body. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Town." "Why?" "To talk to the sheriff." Rowan's stomach dropped. "Everett, the sheriff's been in the Hale's pocket for years. He's not going to do anything about this." "Maybe, maybe not. But it's on record. If things escalate, we'll need that." She stepped closer. "And what if things do escalate? What if whoever did this doesn't stop?" Everett tightened the saddle straps, his jaw working. "Then we deal with it." "How?" He finally looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I don't know yet, but I'm not starting a war over 3 dead cattle. Too many people have died already." "They're testing you," Rowan said. "Testing us. If we don't push back—" "We will push back," Everett interrupted, "just not the way they expect." He swung into the saddle, and for a moment Rowan thought he'd ride off without another word, but he paused, looking down at her. "You want to help?" he asked. "Yes." "Then keep the ranch running while I'm gone. Keep the hands focused. Don't let them do anything stupid." It was a tall order. The hands were angry, itching for retaliation, but Rowan nodded. "I can do that." Everett's expression softened, just slightly. "I know you can." Then he rode out, leaving her alone with a ranch full of angry men and a growing certainty that things were about to get much worse before they got better. Bond. Everett returned late that night, his face drawn and exhausted. Rowan waited on the porch, a rifle across her lap, not because she expected trouble, but because she'd learned long ago that preparation was the only real defense. He dismounted heavily, his shoulders sagging. "How'd it go?" she asked. "About as well as you'd expect." He climbed the porch steps and dropped into the chair beside her. "Sheriff took my report, said he'd look into it. We both know that means he'll file it and forget about it." "So what now?" Everett rubbed his face. "Now we wait. Watch. And make damn sure we don't give them any more ammunition." Rowan studied him. He looked worn down in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. This was the weight of responsibility, of trying to hold together something that kept threatening to fall apart. "You can't do this alone," she said quietly. He glanced at her. "I'm not alone. Aren't you?" Everett was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. "I've been running this place by myself for 5 years, since my father died. I'm used to alone." "That doesn't mean it's good for you." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. Vulnerability, maybe. Or just bone-deep tiredness. "What do you want me to say, Rowan?" "I want you to admit that you need help, that you can't fight this fight by yourself." "I know I can't." The words came out rough, reluctant. "That's why I agreed to this marriage in the first place. I needed an ally, a partner." "Then let me be that," she said. "Stop shutting me out when things get hard." Everett's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he'd argue, but then he nodded once, slowly. "All right," he said. "All right." It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was a step, a small crack in the armor he'd built around himself. Rowan reached over and squeezed his hand, brief, awkward, but genuine. He didn't pull away. They sat like that for a while, hands loosely clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. And for the first time since the wedding, Rowan felt like they might actually make it through this, together. The next morning brought another test. Rowan was in the barn organizing tack when she heard raised voices outside. She stepped into the sunlight to find 2 of the ranch hands, Ray and Danny, facing off near the corral. "I'm telling you, we need to ride over there and burn their fields," Ray was saying, his face flushed with anger. "Show them we're not going to take this lying down." Danny shook his head. "Boss said no retaliation. We follow his orders." "Boss is going soft. Ever since he married that Mercer woman," Rowan's voice cut across the yard like a whip. "Finish that sentence, Ray. I dare you." Both men turned. Ray's eyes narrowed, but Danny looked relieved. Rowan walked toward them, her posture calm but her gaze sharp. "You've got something to say about me. Say it to my face, not behind my back." Ray sneered. "You want the truth? Fine. You're the reason we're in this mess. If Everett hadn't married you, none of this would be happening." "You're wrong." Rowan stopped a few feet away, keeping her voice level. "This feud's been going on for 40 years, long before I showed up, and it'll keep going unless people like you stop looking for excuses to fight. So we're just supposed to let them poison our cattle, kill our stock? No, we're supposed to be smarter than they are, stronger, better." Ray spat into the dirt. "That's coward talk." Rowan's temper flared, but she kept it in check. Barely. "You want to ride over to Mercer Land and start burning things? Go ahead. But you'll do it without Everett's support, and without mine. And when the whole thing blows up in your face, don't come crying to us." Ray's face reddened, but he didn't respond. Danny cleared his throat. "Ma'am's right, Ray. We start a fire, it'll spread, and we'll all burn." For a moment, Ray looked like he might argue, but then he turned and stalked off toward the bunkhouse, muttering under his breath. Rowan exhaled slowly, her hands trembling slightly. She'd faced down worse than Ray, but the confrontation still left her rattled. Danny approached, his expression apologetic. "Sorry about that, ma'am. Ray's just angry. We all are." "I know," Rowan said, "but anger without direction is just destruction, and we can't afford that right now." Danny nodded. "I'll talk to the others. Make sure they know where we stand." "Thank you." He tipped his hat and walked away. Rowan stood alone in the yard, her heart still racing. She'd won this round, but she knew there would be more. The hands were loyal to Everett, but loyalty had limits. If things kept escalating, she wasn't sure how long that loyalty would hold. She needed to find a way to prove herself, not just as Everett's wife, but as someone worth following, and she needed to do it soon. That night, Rowan couldn't sleep. Her mind kept circling back to the poisoned cattle, to Ray's accusations, to the growing sense that time was running out. She slipped out of bed and went downstairs, intending to make tea. But when she reached the kitchen, she found Everett already there, sitting at the table with a map spread out in front of him. He looked up when she entered. "Can't sleep either?" "No." She sat down across from him. "What's this?" "Property lines. I'm trying to figure out where someone could have accessed the north pasture without being seen." Rowan leaned forward, studying the map. "There's an old access road here," she said, pointing. "It's overgrown now, but it used to connect Hale Land to the main county road. Someone familiar with the area could use it." Everett's eyes sharpened. "How do you know about that?" "My father used it years ago, before the feud got really bad." She met his gaze. "I know this land as well as you do, Everett. Maybe better in some places." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Show me tomorrow. We'll check it out." "Together?" "Together." Something warm bloomed in Rowan's chest. He was including her, trusting her knowledge, her instincts. "All right," she said. They sat in silence for a while, both staring at the map. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. "Rowan," Everett said quietly. "Yeah?" "About what Ray said earlier. I heard about it," she said. "Danny told me you backed me up." Everett's jaw tightened. "Ray's a good worker, but he's got a short fuse. I told him if he can't respect you, he can find work elsewhere." Rowan's throat tightened. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "We're in this together. That means when someone comes after you, they come after me too." The word settled over her like a blanket, warm, protective, unfamiliar. "Thank you," she said softly. Everett nodded, then turned back to the map. But Rowan kept watching him, this man she'd married out of necessity, this stranger who was slowly becoming something more. Not a friend, not quite, but maybe, someday, a true partner. And in a place like Copper Ridge, that was worth more than she'd ever imagined. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that promised nothing good. Rowan met Everett at the barn as planned, both of them armed and alert. The old access road she'd mentioned sat 2 miles north, carved into the hillside decades ago and long since reclaimed by brush and time. They rode in silence, the tension between them different now, not uncomfortable, but charged with purpose. Everett had stopped treating her like a liability. She'd proven herself too many times for that. But this felt different. This felt like he was genuinely relying on her, trusting her judgment in a way that went beyond mere acceptance. The road appeared exactly where Rowan remembered it, half hidden beneath scrub oak and tumbleweed. Everett dismounted first, studying the ground with the careful attention of a man who'd learned to read tracks before he could read books. "Fresh tire marks," he said quietly, crouching down. "Truck. Maybe a day old." Rowan knelt beside him, her heart sinking. She'd hoped she was wrong, hoped the access road had stayed forgotten. But the evidence was clear. Someone had used it recently, and they'd known exactly where they were going. "They came in at night," Everett continued, tracing the pattern in the dirt. "Parked here, walked the rest of the way to the pasture. Smart. The sound of an engine would have carried." "How many?" "2, maybe 3. He stood, his expression grim. "One to poison the trough, the others as lookouts." Rowan's jaw tightened. This wasn't random. They scouted it, planned it. "Yeah." Everett's hand rested on his rifle. "Question is, who?" She wanted to say it wasn't her family, wanted to believe that Caleb, for all his hot-headed stupidity, wouldn't stoop to poisoning livestock, but she couldn't be sure. Not anymore. "We need to close this road," she said. "Block it off so they can't use it again." Everett nodded. "We will. But first, I want to know who's behind this." "How?" He looked at her, and something flickered in his eyes, something cold and calculating. "We set a trap." Rowan's pulse quickened. "What kind of trap?" "The kind that makes them think we're vulnerable, that we're not watching." He gestured toward the road. "We leave this open, make it look like we haven't noticed, but we station someone here at night, wait for them to come back." It was risky. If the wrong people found out, if someone got hurt, but it was also smart. Reactive defense would only get them so far. They needed to be proactive, to take control of the situation before it spiraled further. "I'll do it," Rowan said. Everett's head snapped toward her. "No." "Why not? I know this area better than anyone. I can handle myself." "I'm not doubting that." His voice was firm but not angry. "But if something happens to you, then it happens. Same as it could happen to you or any of the hands." She met his gaze squarely. "You said we're partners. That means equal risk." Everett's jaw worked, frustration and concern warring in his expression. Finally, he exhaled. "Fine, but not alone. I'll be with you." "Everett, non-negotiable." His tone left no room for argument. "We do this together, or we don't do it at all." Rowan wanted to protest, to prove she didn't need protection, but she recognized the look in his eyes. This wasn't about doubting her capabilities. This was about something else, something deeper. He was afraid of losing her. The realization hit her like a physical blow. When had that happened? When had she stopped being just a means to an end and become someone he actually cared about? "All right," she said quietly. "Together." Relief flickered across Everett's face, brief but unmistakable. He nodded once, then turned back to his horse. "We'll start tonight. Tell the hands we're doing overnight inventory checks. They don't need to know the real reason. And if someone does show up, we identify them, get proof, then we decide what to do." Rowan mounted her horse, her mind already racing through scenarios. This could go wrong in a dozen different ways, but doing nothing wasn't an option, not anymore. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the weight of what they'd agreed to settling over them like early frost. That evening, Rowan told the hands she and Everett would be checking fence lines overnight. Ray looked skeptical, but Danny and the others accepted the explanation without question. Tom even offered to come along, but Everett waved him off. "We've got it covered," he said. "You all get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." They left just after sunset, riding north under a sky streaked with purple and gold. Rowan had dressed in dark clothes, practical and quiet. Everett had done the same. They looked more like outlaws than ranchers, which maybe wasn't far from the truth. When they reached the access road, Everett found a spot with good cover, a cluster of rocks and scrub that overlooked the entrance but kept them hidden from view. They tethered the horses behind the rocks and settled in to wait. The desert at night was a different world. The temperature dropped fast, and the darkness felt absolute once the last light faded. Stars emerged in brilliant clusters, so many it seemed impossible the sky could hold them all. An owl called somewhere in the distance, its voice eerie and forlorn. Rowan sat with her back against a boulder, rifle across her lap. Everett was a few feet away, his posture relaxed but alert. They'd brought water and jerky, enough to last through the night if needed. "Could be hours," Everett said quietly. "Could be nothing." "I know. You sure you're up for this?" Rowan glanced at him. Even in the darkness, she could make out the lines of his face, the concern he was trying to hide. "I've done worse with less sleep." "I don't doubt it." He paused. "But that doesn't mean you have to keep proving yourself. Not to me." The words caught her off guard. She'd spent so long fighting to earn respect, to justify her presence, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be accepted without conditions. "Old habits," she said softly. Everett shifted, moving closer until they sat shoulder to shoulder. The warmth of him was startling in the cold night air. "You've got nothing left to prove, Rowan. You've earned your place here 10 times over." Her throat tightened. "Your uncle doesn't think so. Half the town doesn't think so." "I think so, and on this ranch, that's what matters." She turned to look at him, and their faces were suddenly very close. In the starlight, his eyes looked almost silver, intense and searching. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "Really, it would have been easier to marry someone from town, someone without all this baggage." Everett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "Because you're strong. Because you don't back down. Because when things get hard, you don't run. You dig in deeper." He paused. "And because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about convenience and started being about something real." Rowan's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to ask what he meant by real, wanted to push for clarity, but she was also terrified of the answer. Before she could respond, a sound cut through the night. An engine. They both froze, heads turning toward the access road. Headlights appeared in the distance, bouncing over the rough terrain. Everett's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed once, a silent communication. Then he released her and brought his rifle up, not aiming but ready. Rowan's pulse thundered in her ears as the truck drew closer. It was moving slowly, cautiously, headlights dimmed. Whoever was driving knew the area, knew they needed to be quiet. The truck stopped about 50 yards from their position. 2 men climbed out, their faces hidden in shadow. One carried a large container, gas maybe, or more poison. The other had a rifle slung over his shoulder. Rowan's breath caught. She recognized the way the second man moved, the slight hitch in his stride. Caleb. Her brother was one of them. Beside her, Everett had gone completely still. He'd seen it too. The men moved toward the fence line, clearly intending to cross onto Hale property. But before they could, Everett stood up, his rifle trained on them. "That's far enough," he called out. Both men spun, the one with the container dropping it in surprise. Liquid sloshed out, gleaming in the starlight. "Who's there?" Caleb demanded, his hand going to his rifle. Rowan stood, her own weapon raised. "It's us, Caleb. Put the gun down." Her brother's face went white as he recognized her voice. "Rowan? What the hell are you doing out here?" "Stopping you from doing something stupid." She stepped forward, keeping her rifle steady. "What's in the container?" "None of your damn business." "It is when you're trespassing on my land," Everett said coldly, "with intent to commit sabotage." The other man, Rowan didn't recognize him, started backing toward the truck. Caleb grabbed his arm, stopping him. "You're choosing him over your own family?" Caleb's voice was ragged with betrayal. "After everything the Hales have done to us?" "I'm choosing not to perpetuate a war that's already killed too many people," Rowan shot back, "including our father. Or have you forgotten that? Dad died fighting for our land." "Dad died because he was too stubborn to see that fighting was never going to solve anything." Rowan's voice cracked. "And now you're doing the same thing, poisoning cattle, sabotaging property. What's next, Caleb? Are you going to burn down the house with me inside?" Caleb flinched like she'd struck him. "I would never—" "Wouldn't you? Because right now I don't know what you're capable of." Silence fell, heavy and painful. The stranger shifted nervously, clearly wanting to run, but Caleb stood frozen, his face a mask of anger and hurt. "You were supposed to be a spy," he said quietly. You were supposed to marry him, get close, find out their weaknesses. That was the plan. Rowan's stomach dropped. What? That's why the family agreed to the marriage, why we didn't fight it. Caleb's laugh was bitter. We thought you understood, thought you were playing the long game. The revelation hit her like a punch. Her family hadn't supported the marriage out of hope for peace. They'd seen it as an opportunity, a way to infiltrate the enemy. And they'd expected her to betray Everett. Is that what you all think? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That I've been spying? Caleb's silence was answer enough. Everett spoke, his voice like ice. She's done nothing but work herself to the bone on this ranch. She's earned respect from my hands through sweat and skill, and she stood up to her own family to try to make this peace work. He paused. If you think she's a spy, you're a bigger fool than I thought. Caleb's gaze swung to Everett, hatred burning in his eyes. You don't know her like I do. Maybe not, but I know who she is now, and that's someone with more integrity than you'll ever have. The words hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown. Caleb's hand twitched toward his rifle. Rowan stepped between them. Don't. Move, Rowan. No. She faced her brother fully, letting her rifle lower slightly. Not a surrender, but a gesture of trust. I'm not a spy, Caleb. I never was. I married Everett because it was the only way to stop this insanity, and I've stayed because I believe in what we're trying to build. You've gone soft, Caleb spat. They've turned you. No, I've just finally opened my eyes. Rowan's voice was steady now, certain. This feud has taken everything from us. Our parents, our land, our future. And for what? Pride? Revenge? Neither of those things will keep you warm at night or put food on your table. So you're just giving up? Surrendering? I'm choosing a different kind of fight, one that doesn't end with more graves. Caleb stared at her, conflict raging in his expression. For a moment she thought he might listen, might actually hear her, but then his jaw hardened. You're dead to me. The words cut deeper than any blade. Rowan felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Then I guess I'm dead, she said quietly. But at least I'll die knowing I tried to make things better, instead of worse. Caleb turned away, grabbing the stranger's arm. Let's go. They climbed back into the truck, the engine roaring to life. Caleb didn't look back as they drove away, taillights disappearing into the darkness. Rowan stood frozen, her entire body trembling. She'd known confronting her family was inevitable, but she hadn't expected it to hurt this much. Everett's hand touched her shoulder, gentle but grounding. You all right? She shook her head, unable to speak. He didn't push, just stood beside her, solid and present, until the trembling subsided. I'm sorry, he said finally. I know that wasn't easy. He thinks I betrayed him. Rowan's voice was raw. My own brother thinks I'm a traitor. You're not. You're brave. Braver than anyone I've ever met. She turned to look at him, and the sincerity in his eyes nearly undid her. How can you say that? I couldn't even convince him. You stood your ground. You told him the truth, even knowing it would cost you. Everett's hand moved from her shoulder to her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. That's not weakness. That's strength. Rowan closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. For so long she'd held herself together through sheer force of will. But here, now, with Everett's hand warm against her skin, she felt like she could finally let herself break. Just a little. What if he's right? She whispered. What if I have changed? Then you've changed for the better. Everett's voice was fierce. And anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. In the starlight, he looked like something out of a dream, strong, steadfast, real. Thank you, she said. He nodded, his hand lingering for just a moment before dropping away. Come on, let's get you home. Home. The word settled over her like a blanket. This place, this ranch, this life with Everett, it had become home without her even realizing it. They rode back through the darkness, side by side, and for the first time since the confrontation, Rowan felt something like peace. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Everett reported the incident to the sheriff, who promised to investigate but clearly wouldn't. They blocked off the access road with new fencing and posted extra guards at night. The ranch settled into a cautious routine, everyone waiting for the next attack. But it didn't come. Instead, something else happened. A letter arrived, hand-delivered by a messenger Rowan didn't recognize. It was addressed to her, the handwriting unfamiliar. She opened it in the kitchen, Everett watching from across the table. The contents made her blood run cold. It was from the Mercer family elders, the old guard who'd outlived the worst of the fighting and now controlled what remained of Mercer land through sheer stubbornness and cunning. They wanted to meet, wanted to discuss terms regarding her marriage and the future of the peace accord. "It's a setup," Everett said immediately. "They'll try to force you to choose, them or me." Rowan's hand shook as she set the letter down. "Maybe. But if I don't go, they'll see it as confirmation that I've turned my back on them completely." "So what? You don't owe them anything? Don't I?" She looked at him. "They're still my family, Everett. My blood." "Blood doesn't mean loyalty when they're asking you to betray yourself." He was right. She knew he was right. But the pull of family was strong, even when that family had proven toxic. "What if this is a chance?" she said slowly. "What if I can actually make them understand?" Everett's expression darkened. "Or what if they try to hurt you?" "They won't." "You don't know that." "I know them better than you do." Rowan stood, pacing. "Look, I understand your concern, but if there's even a chance I can end this peacefully, I have to try." Everett rose, closing the distance between them. "Then I'm coming with you." "That'll make it worse." "I don't care." His voice was absolute. "You're not walking into a potential ambush alone." Rowan wanted to argue, but she saw the determination in his eyes. He wasn't going to budge on this. "Fine," she said, "but you stay back. Let me do the talking. As long as you're safe, I'll stay silent as a stone." She almost smiled at that. The idea of Everett Hale staying silent was laughable, but she appreciated the gesture. The meeting was set for 3 days later, at neutral ground, an abandoned trading post halfway between Hale and Mercer territory. Rowan spent those days preparing mentally, rehearsing arguments, steeling herself for whatever waited. Everett spent them watching her with an intensity that was both comforting and unnerving. On the morning of the meeting, he found her in the barn, checking her saddle for the 3rd time. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." "Why? What do you think you'll accomplish?" Rowan turned to face him. "I think I'll show them that I'm not ashamed of my choice, that I chose this life, this partnership, deliberately and completely." She paused. "And maybe, just maybe, I'll plant a seed. Make them question whether continuing this fight is really worth it." Everett studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was sudden, unexpected, but Rowan melted into it. He smelled like leather and wood smoke, and something uniquely him. His heart beat steady against her ear. "Be careful," he murmured into her hair. "Please." "I will." He pulled back, his hands framing her face. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to, but he just touched his forehead to hers, a gesture more intimate than any kiss could have been. "Let's go," he said. They rode out together into the unknown. Ma'am. The trading post was exactly as Rowan remembered, weathered wood and broken windows, a relic of better times when Hales and Mercers could do business without bloodshed. Now it stood as a monument to all they'd lost. 3 figures waited outside. Rowan recognized them immediately, her Aunt Margaret, her Uncle Thomas, and old Edmund Mercer, the patriarch who'd outlived 2 wives and most of his children. No Caleb. That was either a good sign or a very bad one. Everett stayed mounted a respectful distance away, his rifle visible but not threatening. Rowan dismounted and walked forward alone. "Aunt Margaret," she said, nodding. Margaret's face was carved from the same hard desert stone as everything else in Copper Ridge. "Rowan, you look well." "I am well." "We weren't sure you would come," Thomas said. His tone was neutral, but his eyes were calculating. "I said I would." Edmund stepped forward, leaning heavily on a cane. He was ancient, his skin like parchment, but his eyes were still sharp. "You've caused quite a stir, girl." "That wasn't my intention." "Wasn't it?" He gestured toward Everett. You married a Hale, took his name, work his land. What else would you call it but a stir? Rowan kept her voice steady. I call it survival. For both families. Margaret scoffed. Survival? We've been surviving just fine without Hale interference. Have you? Rowan looked at each of them in turn. How many acres have you lost in the last 5 years? How many people? How much longer can you keep this up before there's nothing left? Thomas's jaw tightened. That's not your concern anymore. It is. It always will be. Rowan took a breath. I didn't come here to argue. I came here to ask you to consider what we're building. A real peace, say, a chance to move forward. With a Hale, Edmund said flatly. Yes, with a Hale. Rowan met his gaze without flinching. I know what his family did to ours. I haven't forgotten. But I also know that continuing to fight won't bring back the dead or heal the wounds. It'll just make new ones. Margaret's expression softened slightly. You sound like your mother. The words hit Rowan hard. Her mother had died when she was 12, caught in the crossfire of a skirmish she'd tried to stop. Mom would have wanted this, Rowan said quietly. She always said the feud was poison, that it would kill us all if we let it. Your mother was a dreamer, Edmund said, and dreamers don't last long in Copper Ridge. Maybe they should. Rowan's voice grew stronger. Maybe it's time we started dreaming instead of just surviving. Silence fell. The three elders exchanged glances, communicating in that wordless way people who'd lived together for decades could. Finally, Edmund spoke. You want our blessing? Rowan hesitated. I want your understanding, and maybe, someday, your support. That's a lot to ask. I know. Edmund studied her, his ancient eyes seeing more than she was comfortable with. You love him? The question caught her off guard. Did she? She cared about Everett, respected him, relied on him. But love? I don't know, she admitted, but I'm building something with him that matters, something worth protecting. Edmund nodded slowly. At least you're honest. He turned to Margaret and Thomas. What do you think? Margaret sighed. I think she's made her choice, and short of dragging her back by force, there's nothing we can do about it. We could disown her, Thomas suggested. We could, Edmund agreed, but what would that accomplish? She'd still be married to him, still be on Hale land. We'd just lose whatever influence we might still have. Rowan's heart pounded. This was it, the moment they'd either accept her decision or cut her loose entirely. Edmund turned back to her. Here's what I'll offer. We won't openly support your marriage, but we won't actively oppose it either. You want peace? Earn it. Prove that this alliance can work. If you do, maybe we'll reconsider. It wasn't what she'd hoped for, but it was more than she'd expected. Thank you, she said. Edmund waved a dismissive hand. Don't thank me yet. You've got a long road ahead, and not everyone in the family is as pragmatic as we are. Rowan understood the warning. Caleb and others like him would keep fighting, keep trying to sabotage what she and Everett were building. But at least now she had a chance. She said her goodbyes, mounted her horse, and rode back to Everett. His eyes searched her face. How'd it go? Better than expected. Not as good as I hoped. He nodded. That's usually how these things go. They rode back to the ranch together, and Rowan felt lighter somehow. The elders hadn't embraced her, but they hadn't disowned her either. It was progress. Small, fragile, but real. And in Copper Ridge, that was worth celebrating. The weeks following the meeting brought a shift so subtle that at first, Rowan didn't recognize it for what it was. The attack stopped. The sabotage ceased. The constant vigilance that had defined their days began to ease, replaced by something that almost resembled normalcy. But peace in Copper Ridge was never just peace. It was a test. And Rowan knew the real test was coming. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a telegram from Edmund Mercer, short, cryptic, and delivered by a rider who wouldn't meet her eyes. The message said only, Your father-in-law arrives Thursday. Prepare yourself. Rowan read it 3 times, her stomach tightening with each pass. Everett's father was dead, had been for 5 years, which meant only one thing. His grandfather, Coleman Hale, the patriarch, the man who'd built the Hale Empire through sheer force of will and wasn't afraid to burn anyone who got in his way. The man whose hatred for the Mercers was legendary, carved into his bones by decades of bloodshed. And he was coming to judge whether this marriage was worth keeping. Rowan found Everett in the stable, working on a bridle that had seen better days. He looked up when she entered, read her expression immediately, and set the leather down. What happened? She handed him the telegram. His face went carefully blank as he read it, but she saw the tension creep into his shoulders, the slight tightening of his jaw. "He's early," Everett said quietly. "I wasn't expecting him for another month." "You knew he was coming?" "I knew he'd come eventually. He always does." Everett crumpled the telegram in his fist. "He likes to remind everyone who really runs this family." Rowan's chest tightened. "What's he going to do?" "Test you, challenge you, try to find every crack in our foundation and wedge it open." Everett met her gaze. "He won't be kind, Rowan. Coleman doesn't believe in kindness." "I can handle difficult men." "Not like him, you can't." There was something almost like fear in Everett's eyes, fear for her, not of his grandfather. "Coleman's different. He doesn't just want to win arguments. He wants to dominate, to prove that he's right and everyone else is wrong." "And what does he think about our marriage?" Everett's silence was answer enough. Rowan exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. "Then I guess I'll have to change his mind." "You can't change Coleman's mind. Nobody can." "Then I'll survive his judgment." She stepped closer, her voice firm. "I've survived everything else this place has thrown at me. I can survive your grandfather." Everett studied her for a long moment, something complex moving behind his eyes. Then he reached out and took her hand, a gesture that had become more common between them in recent weeks, but still felt significant each time. "I'll be right there with you," he said. "Whatever he says, whatever he does. You're not facing him alone." Rowan squeezed his hand. "I know." But as she walked back to the house, dread settled in her stomach like a stone. She'd faced down her own family, confronted her brother, earned the grudging respect of the ranch hands. But Coleman Hale was a different kind of challenge entirely. He was power, legacy, the living embodiment of everything this feud had been built on. And she had 2 days to prepare. Thursday came too fast. Rowan woke before dawn, her nerves strung tight as wire. She dressed carefully, not in her work clothes, but in the one nice dress she owned, simple and dark. She braided her hair, checked her reflection, and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone trying too hard to belong. Frustrated, she tore the braid out, let her hair fall loose, and changed back into her usual clothes: jeans, boots, a clean shirt. If Coleman Hale was going to judge her, he'd judge the real her, not some costume version designed to please him. Everett found her in the kitchen, gripping a cup of coffee like a lifeline. "He'll be here by noon," Everett said, pouring his own cup. "He always travels at his own pace, likes to make people wait." "Control tactic." "Everything with Coleman is a control tactic." Everett leaned against the counter. "Listen, there are some things you should know before he arrives." Rowan set her cup down. "I'm listening." "Coleman built this ranch from nothing, fought off claim jumpers, survived droughts, buried 2 wives and 3 of his 4 children. The only one who survived was my father, and their relationship was—" Everett paused, searching for words. "Complicated. Dad tried to end the feud a few times. Coleman shut him down every time, said Mercers couldn't be trusted, that peace was just a different kind of surrender. And then your father died." "Yeah, killed by a Mercer bullet during a dispute over water rights." Everett's voice was carefully neutral. "Coleman's never forgiven that. Never will." Rowan's throat tightened. "So to him, I'm the enemy wearing his family's name. To him, you're a test. Of me, mostly. To see if I'm strong enough to run this ranch, or if I'm too weak to keep a Mercer in line." The words stung, but Rowan understood the brutal logic. In Coleman's world, strength was the only currency that mattered, and letting your wife, especially a Mercer wife, have any real power would be seen as weakness. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. Everett moved closer, his expression intense. "Be yourself. Don't apologize for who you are or where you came from. Don't let him bully you into shrinking." He paused. And don't let him drive a wedge between us. That's what he'll try to do. Will it work? Not if we don't let it. There was certainty in his voice, a quiet faith that steadied her. Whatever happened today, they'd face it together. She just hoped that would be enough. Coleman Hale arrived at exactly noon, his timing as precise as everything else about him. He came in a black truck, dust trailing behind it like a funeral shroud. 2 men accompanied him, ranch hands from his own property, their faces hard and watchful. The truck pulled up to the main house and stopped. Rowan watched from the porch, Everett beside her. Her heart hammered, but she kept her face calm. The driver's door opened, and Coleman emerged. He was tall, though age had bent him slightly forward. His hair was pure white, his face a roadmap of lines and scars. But his eyes, steel gray, just like Everett's, were sharp and assessing, missing nothing. He wore work clothes, well-made but practical. No pretense. This was a man who'd built his empire with his own hands and wanted everyone to know it. Coleman's gaze swept over the ranch, taking inventory, then landed on Rowan. The weight of that stare was like physical pressure. "So," he said, his voice gravelly but strong. "This is the Mercer girl." Rowan stepped forward, keeping her spine straight. "Rowan Hale, sir. Your granddaughter-in-law." Coleman's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Hale, is it? That was quick. It's been 2 months. 2 months. A lifetime in some marriages, a blink in others." He climbed the porch steps slowly, deliberately, until he stood directly in front of her. Up close, she could see the cunning in his eyes, the calculation. "Tell me, girl, do you love my grandson?" The question was so blunt it took her breath away. Beside her, Everett stiffened. "Grandfather, I wasn't asking you." Coleman didn't even glance at Everett. His focus remained locked on Rowan. "Well?" Rowan could have lied. Should have, maybe. But something in Coleman's expression told her he'd smell a lie from a mile away. "I respect him," she said carefully. "I trust him, and I'm committed to making this marriage work." "That's not what I asked. It's the truth." Coleman studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled, a thin, sharp thing that held no warmth. "At least you're honest. That's more than I expected." He turned to Everett. "Show me the ranch. I want to see what you've done with the place." It wasn't a request. Everett nodded. "Yes, sir." Coleman started walking, and Everett followed. But before Rowan could move, Coleman glanced back. "You two, girl. Let's see if you actually know anything about running a ranch, or if you're just decorative." Rowan's temper flared, but she swallowed it down. Getting angry was exactly what he wanted. She fell into step beside Everett, and together they led Coleman on a tour of the property. For the next 3 hours, Coleman interrogated every aspect of the ranch's operation. He inspected fences, questioned water management, criticized the placement of the cattle, and found fault in decisions Rowan knew were sound. He wasn't looking for actual problems. He was looking for weaknesses. Rowan answered his questions when directed to her, kept her responses short and factual. She refused to be baited into arguments or defensive explanations. Everett did the same, his demeanor professional but tense. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was low and Coleman looked satisfied, which somehow felt more dangerous than if he'd looked angry. They gathered in the dining room for dinner. Rowan had prepared a simple meal: roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables from the garden. Nothing fancy, but substantial. Coleman sat at the head of the table, a position Everett usually occupied, but he'd yielded it without comment, taking the seat to his grandfather's right. Rowan sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. They ate in silence for several minutes. Then Coleman spoke. "The ranch looks better than I expected," he said. "You've made some smart decisions, Everett. The new irrigation system, the expanded grazing rotation. Your father would be proud." Everett's expression didn't change. "Thank you, sir. Of course, you've also made some questionable choices." Coleman's gaze slid to Rowan. "Like this marriage." Rowan's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. "Grandfather," Everett said quietly, "we've discussed this." "Have we? Because I don't recall giving my blessing." "I don't need your blessing. I'm not a child." "No, you're not. You're the head of this family, which means your decisions affect all of us." Coleman set his fork down. "Marrying a Mercer wasn't just a personal choice. It was a political one, and it's put us in a vulnerable position. Or it's ended a war that's been bleeding us dry for 40 years, Rowan said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. Coleman turned his full attention to her. You think marrying my grandson ended the war? I think it's a start. Naive. The word was dismissive. Wars don't end because two people sign a contract. They end when one side destroys the other completely. Then what are you proposing? Rowan leaned forward. We keep fighting until there's nobody left? Until both families are extinct? I'm proposing we don't trust the enemy just because she's wearing our name. The insult landed like a slap. Rowan felt Everett tense beside her, saw his hand curl into a fist on the table, but she forced herself to stay calm. Reacting emotionally was what Coleman wanted. I'm not the enemy, she said quietly. I'm your family now, whether you accept that or not. Family is earned, not declared. Then tell me how to earn it. Rowan met his gaze without flinching. What do I have to do to prove I'm not here to sabotage this ranch or hurt your grandson? Coleman leaned back in his chair, his eyes calculating. You can't prove a negative, girl. I can't prove you won't betray us, any more than you can prove you will. That's the problem with trust. It requires faith. And I don't have faith in Mercers. Not even one who's worked this ranch as hard as any of your hands? Who stood up to her own family to defend this marriage? Who's been here 2 months, Coleman interrupted. 2 months against 40 years of bloodshed. You'll forgive me if I'm not convinced. Rowan's hands shook with frustration. There was no winning this argument. Coleman had already made up his mind. But then Everett spoke, his voice low and dangerous. That's enough. Coleman's gaze swung to him. Excuse me? I said that's enough. Everett stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You came here to inspect the ranch. Fine. You've done that. But I won't sit here and let you insult my wife. Your wife is a Mercer. My wife is Rowan Hale. She's earned her place here through blood, sweat, and more courage than most people have in their entire lives. Everett's voice was steel. She stood by me when she had every reason to run. She's faced down her own family, risked her life to protect this ranch, and worked harder than anyone I've ever known. If that's not enough to earn your respect, then frankly, I don't care about your respect anymore. Silence fell like a hammer. Coleman stared at his grandson, something unreadable in his expression. Then he turned to Rowan. Is that true? You faced down your family? Rowan nodded, not trusting her voice. Tell me. So she did. She told him about Caleb cutting the fence, about riding onto Mercerland to confront him, about the meeting with the elders. She kept her voice steady, factual, leaving out the emotional weight, but not the truth. When she finished, Coleman was silent for a long moment. You chose this ranch over your blood, he said finally, over your brother. I chose peace over war, and yes, that meant choosing Everett's side when my family was in the wrong. Coleman's expression was impossible to read. Then, slowly, he nodded. That took guts, he said. Stupid, maybe, but gutsy. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't condemnation either. I still don't trust you, Coleman continued, and I probably never will. But I'll admit, you're not what I expected. What did you expect? Rowan asked. A spy. A saboteur. Someone using my grandson to get close to our operation. Coleman's gaze was sharp. Are you any of those things? No. Then prove it. Keep proving it every day until even I can't deny it. It was a challenge, a test without end, but Rowan nodded. I will. Coleman stood, his joints creaking. I'll be staying for a few days, observing, make sure everything you've told me is true. Everett's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Good. Coleman moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. He turned back to Rowan. Everett defended you tonight. Stood up to me for you. That means something. His voice was quieter now, almost thoughtful. Don't make him regret it. Then he was gone, leaving Rowan and Everett alone in the sudden silence. Rowan exhaled shakily, her entire body trembling with released tension. She'd survived the first encounter, barely. Everett was at her side immediately, his hand on her shoulder. You did good. I didn't do anything. You're the one who stood up to him. Because you deserved it. His thumb brushed against her neck, gentle and grounding. and because he needed to hear it. Rowan turned to face him, and their eyes met. In the dim lamplight, Everett looked younger somehow. The hard edges softened. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always." The word hung between them, heavy with promise, and for the first time Rowan let herself believe it might be true. Coleman stayed for 5 days. 5 days of constant scrutiny, of questions and tests and subtle provocations designed to expose any weakness. He watched how Rowan interacted with the ranch hands, how she handled problems, how she and Everett worked together. Rowan refused to change her behavior to please him. She worked the same hours, made the same decisions, showed the same competence she always had. If Coleman didn't like it, that was his problem. On the 3rd day, something shifted. Rowan was repairing a section of fence when Coleman approached on horseback. She tensed, but didn't stop working. "You know what you're doing with that wire," he observed. "My father taught me." "Mercer?" "Yes." Coleman dismounted, studying the fence line. He was a decent rancher, stubborn as a mule, but decent. Rowan's hand stilled. "You knew my father?" "Before the feud got bad, we did business together sometimes. He had good instincts for cattle." Coleman paused. He also had a short temper and a long memory. Got him killed in the end. It wasn't said cruelly, just as fact, but it still hurt. "He was trying to protect what was his," Rowan said quietly. "So was my son when he got shot." Coleman looked at her. "That's the problem with this feud. Everyone's protecting something. Everyone thinks they're in the right. And everyone ends up dead." Rowan finished twisting the wire and stood, facing him directly. "That's why this marriage matters. It's a chance to break the cycle. Or perpetuate it in a different form. Not if we don't let it." Coleman studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "You're relentless, I'll give you that. I learned from the best." "Your father?" "And my husband." Something flickered in Coleman's expression. Approval, maybe, or at least acknowledgement. "Keep at it," he said gruffly. Then he mounted his horse and rode away. It was the closest thing to acceptance Rowan had gotten from him. She'd take it. On the 5th day, Coleman announced he was leaving. "The ranch is in good hands," he said over breakfast. "Better than I expected." Everett nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming." "Don't thank me yet. I'll be back in 6 months to check on things." Coleman turned to Rowan. "You've got potential, girl. Don't waste it." "I won't, sir." Coleman actually smiled then, a real smile, brief but genuine. "And stop calling me sir. If you're going to be part of this family, you might as well call me Coleman." It was an olive branch. Small, grudging, but real. "Thank you, Coleman," Rowan said. He nodded, then gathered his things and left, his truck disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. Rowan and Everett stood on the porch, watching until he was gone. "Well," Everett said finally, "that went better than expected." Rowan laughed, a slightly hysterical sound born of relief and exhaustion. "Your family has low expectations." "You have no idea." Everett turned to her, his expression serious. "But you met them. All of them. You didn't back down, didn't compromise who you are. That matters." "Does it? He still doesn't trust me." "He trusts you more than he did 5 days ago. For Coleman, that's practically a marriage blessing." Rowan shook her head, but she was smiling. "Your family is impossible." "Yeah, well, you married into it. No backing out now." There was something in his voice, teasing, yes, but also something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken. "I wouldn't want to," she said softly. Everett's gaze intensified. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them until they were nearly touching. "Rowan," he said quietly, "these past few months." Whatever he was about to say was interrupted by Tom's shout from the barn. "Boss, we've got a problem with the north gate." Everett closed his eyes, frustration flickering across his face. Then he sighed. "Duty calls." "Yeah." But neither of them moved immediately. They stood there, caught in the space between what was and what could be. Then Everett reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Later," he said. "We'll talk later." "Later," Rowan agreed. He walked away, and Rowan stood alone on the porch, her heart racing. Something was changing between them. had been changing for weeks, maybe longer. The careful distance they'd maintained was eroding, replaced by something warmer, more real. She didn't know what it meant, but for the first time, she wanted to find out. That night, after the work was done and the ranch had settled into quiet, Rowan found Everett in the study, going over accounts by lamplight. "Hey," she said from the doorway. He looked up, and his expression softened when he saw her. "Hey yourself, come in." She crossed the room and sat in the chair across from his desk. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Everett set down his pen. "I've been thinking. About what you asked me weeks ago. Why I defended you to my grandfather. Why I—" He paused, searching for words. "Why this matters so much to me." Rowan's breath caught. And I think somewhere along the way this stopped being about the ranch or the feud or any of the reasons we got married. Everett's gaze was steady, unflinching. It became about you, about us. Her heart hammered. "Everett, I'm not saying I have all the answers," he continued, "and I'm not great with words, but I know that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is whether you're safe. When I make decisions, I think about how they'll affect you, and when my grandfather tried to tear you down, I couldn't stay silent because—" He paused, his voice dropping. "Because you matter to me. More than I expected. More than I probably should admit." Rowan felt tears prick her eyes. Prick. She'd been so focused on survival, on proving herself, that she hadn't let herself feel what was growing between them. But she felt it now. The warmth, the certainty, the terrifying hope. "You matter to me too," she said quietly. "I didn't think it was possible to care about someone this much in such a short time. But I do. I care about you, about this life we're building together." Everett stood and came around the desk, kneeling in front of her chair so they were eye level. "Then let's stop pretending this is just a business arrangement," he said. "Let's make it real, all of it." Rowan's hands found his, their fingers intertwining. "I thought it already was real." "It was. But now—" Everett paused, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. "Now I want more than partnership. I want—" She kissed him. It was impulsive, maybe too forward, but she couldn't help it. All the walls she'd built, all the careful distance she'd maintained, it crumbled in an instant. Everett froze for half a heartbeat. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he kissed her back with a fierce tenderness that took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Everett rested his forehead against hers. "I was going to say I wanted you," he murmured. "Just you, for real." Rowan smiled, her eyes wet. "I got impatient. I noticed." His thumb brushed her cheek. "No complaints?" They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, the future suddenly bright with possibility. Outside, the desert night was vast and indifferent, but inside, in the quiet warmth of the study, two people who'd started as strangers had found something neither of them expected. Something worth fighting for. Something real. The shift in their relationship changed everything and nothing all at once. The work remained the same. Cattle still needed tending, fences still needed mending, the land still demanded its due. But now when Rowan caught Everett's eye across the breakfast table, something warm passed between them. Now when they worked side by side, their hands would brush and linger. Now when the day ended, they sat together on the porch, not out of obligation, but genuine desire for each other's company. The ranch hands noticed. Tom mentioned it one morning while they were loading hay, a knowing smile on his weathered face. "Boss seems lighter these days," he said casually. "Haven't seen him like this since before his father died." Rowan felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We're just settling in, finding our rhythm." "Sure you are." Tom's grin widened. "And I'm just a simple cowhand who doesn't notice things." Despite her embarrassment, Rowan smiled. The acceptance she'd fought so hard for felt complete now, cemented not just by her work ethic, but by the obvious partnership she and Everett had built. But the peace wouldn't last. It never did in Copper Ridge. The warning came 3 weeks after Coleman's departure, delivered by a messenger Rowan didn't recognize. Another telegram, this one longer and more urgent. Everett read it twice, his expression darkening with each pass. "What is it?" Rowan asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Caleb's been arrested. He and two others were caught trying to sabotage the county water main, the one that feeds both our properties. Everett's jaw tightened. He's facing serious charges. Could be prison. Rowan's world tilted. What? When? Last night. The sheriff caught them in the act. Everett looked at her, concern etched in his features. Your family's asking if you'll testify on his behalf. Character witness. The request hit her like a physical blow. Caleb had tried to sabotage essential infrastructure, had risked the livelihoods of dozens of families, including hers now. But he was still her brother, still family. What do I do? She whispered. Everett set the telegram down and took her hands. That's not my decision to make. This is your family, your brother. I can't tell you what to do. But what do you think I should do? He was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. I think you should do whatever you can live with. If testifying for him means you can sleep at night, do it. If staying silent is what feels right, do that. He squeezed her hands. But whatever you choose, I'm with you. Rowan closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She'd known this moment would come eventually. The moment when she'd have to choose between the life she'd left and the life she'd built. She'd hoped she'd have more time. I need to see him, she said finally. Before I decide anything, I need to talk to him. Everett nodded. I'll take you to town. You don't have to... Yes, I do. His voice was firm. We're in this together, remember? The county jail was a squat building on the edge of Copper Ridge, all concrete and iron bars. The sheriff, a man named Warren who'd been on the Hale payroll for years, met them at the entrance. Mrs. Hale, he said, tipping his hat. Everett, wasn't expecting to see you here. We're here to see Caleb Mercer, Rowan said, keeping her voice steady. Warren's eyebrows rose. You sure about that? He's not exactly in a talking mood. I'm sure. The sheriff led them through narrow corridors that smelled of rust and desperation. He stopped at a cell near the back, where Caleb sat on a thin cot, his head in his hands. You got visitors, Warren said, then stepped back to give them space. Caleb looked up, and Rowan's heart clenched. He looked awful, bruised, exhausted, defeated. When he saw her, his expression cycled through surprise, hope, and finally bitter resignation. Come to gloat? He asked. No. Rowan gripped the bars. I came to understand. Why, Caleb? Why would you do something this stupid? He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Because I'm tired of losing, tired of watching our family shrink while the Hales prosper, tired of... His voice cracked. Tired of my own sister choosing them over us. I didn't choose sides. I chose peace. Same thing. Caleb stood, moving closer to the bars. You married him. You work his land. You defend his property. What else would you call it? I call it trying to build something that doesn't end with more graves. Rowan's voice trembled. But you couldn't let it be, could you? You had to keep fighting, keep sabotaging, keep proving that nothing will ever change. Because nothing will. Caleb slammed his hand against the bars. You think one marriage erases 40 years of hatred? You think the Hales will ever see us as anything but enemies? Some of them already do, Everett said quietly. Both Mercers turned to look at him. He'd been standing back, letting Rowan lead, but now he stepped forward. Your sister has earned more respect on my ranch in 4 months than some hands earn in years, Everett continued. She's proven herself over and over, and the people who matter, the ones actually trying to build something, they see that. You don't speak for everyone, Caleb shot back. No, but I speak for my family, and my family includes Rowan now. Everett's gaze was steady. Which means when you attack my property, you're attacking her too. Did you think about that when you were cutting that water line? Caleb's face reddened. I was trying to help her. By destroying the infrastructure she depends on? By risking the ranch that's now her home? Everett shook his head. You weren't helping her. You were trying to punish her for choosing differently than you wanted. The words landed like punches. Caleb's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, Rowan saw past his anger to the pain beneath. He was scared. Scared of being left behind, of losing what little family he had left, of a future where he didn't know where he fit. She understood that fear, had lived it herself. Caleb, she said softly, I know you're hurting. I know this feels like betrayal. But what you did, sabotaging the water main. That could have hurt dozens of families. Not just Hales, Mercers too. Everyone who depends on that water. I wasn't going to destroy it. Just damage it enough to what? Make a point? Prove you're still fighting? Rowan's voice grew firmer. All you proved is that you'd rather tear things down than build them up. Caleb's eyes glistened. So you won't testify for me. Rowan's heart broke. I can't. Not if it means lying about what you did or why you did it. But he's your brother, Caleb whispered. And you're asking me to compromise everything I believe in to protect you from the consequences of your choices. Rowan's voice cracked. I love you, Caleb. I always will, but I can't save you from this. You have to save yourself. Caleb turned away, his shoulders shaking. Then I guess this is goodbye. It doesn't have to be. Rowan pressed closer to the bars. When you get out, and you will get out eventually, you'll have a choice. Keep fighting this pointless war, or try something different. Try building instead of destroying. Like you did? Like I did. Rowan swallowed hard. It's harder than fighting, but it's worth it. Caleb didn't respond, just stood with his back to her, rigid and silent. After a long moment, Warren stepped forward. Time's up, folks. Rowan wanted to say more, wanted to fix this somehow, but she knew she couldn't. Some bridges could only be rebuilt from both sides. She and Everett walked out of the jail into bright afternoon sunlight that felt too cheerful for the moment. You did the right thing, Everett said quietly. Then why does it feel so awful? Because it's never easy to draw a line with family, even when it's necessary. He put his arm around her shoulders. But you were honest with him. That's more than most people would have been. Rowan leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. What happens now? Now we go home, and we keep building what we started. The trial happened 2 weeks later. Caleb pleaded guilty to attempted sabotage and was sentenced to 2 years with possibility of parole after 1 if he demonstrated good behavior. It was lighter than it could have been. Warren had apparently put in a word about Caleb's cooperation, but it was still prison. Rowan didn't attend the sentencing. She couldn't bear to watch her brother led away in chains, even if he'd brought it on himself. Instead, she threw herself into work. The ranch was preparing for winter, and there was always something that needed doing: stocking supplies, reinforcing shelters, checking equipment. The physical labor helped quiet her mind. One evening, as she was finishing repairs on the barn door, she heard horses approaching, multiple riders coming fast. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle leaning against the wall. But when the riders came into view, she recognized them. Mercer family members. Her Aunt Margaret, her Uncle Thomas, and 3 others she knew by face, if not by name. Everett emerged from the house, clearly having heard the commotion. He moved to stand beside Rowan, his posture alert but not aggressive. Margaret dismounted first. We need to talk, she said without preamble. About what? Rowan asked warily. About Caleb, about the family, about what comes next. Margaret's expression was impossible to read. Can we come inside? Rowan glanced at Everett. He nodded slightly. The decision was hers. All right, she said. Come in. They gathered in the main room, the Mercers looking uncomfortable in Hale territory. Rowan offered coffee, which was accepted with surprising politeness. Once everyone was settled, Thomas spoke. We owe you an apology. Rowan blinked. I'm sorry, what? An apology, he repeated, for putting you in an impossible position, for expecting you to choose between your marriage and your blood family, for thinking you were spying when you were actually trying to make peace work. Margaret picked up the thread. Caleb's arrest was a wake-up call, made us realize how close we came to losing everything, not to the Hales, but to our own stupidity. She looked directly at Rowan. You were right. This feud is killing us, and we've been too stubborn to admit it. Rowan's throat tightened. What are you saying? We're saying we want to end this, Thomas said. Really end it. Not just stop the fighting, but actually build something better. Edmund Mercer, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. We're not asking you to forgive Caleb or excuse what he did, but we are asking you to help us find a way forward. You and Everett have proven it's possible for Hales and Mercers to work together. We want to expand that, make it official. Everett had been listening quietly, but now he spoke. What exactly are you proposing? A formal alliance, Margaret said. Shared water rights, cooperative land management, joint marketing of cattle. We stop competing and start collaborating. That's a big step, Everett said carefully. What changed your minds? Watching our children go to prison for a feud none of them started, Edmund said bluntly. Caleb's not the first Mercer to end up behind bars over this stupidity, and he won't be the last unless we change course. We're tired, Hale. Tired of fighting. Tired of losing. Rowan looked at Everett, saw him processing the offer. This was what they'd hoped for from the beginning. Real peace built on cooperation rather than just absence of conflict. But it was also risky. Old hatreds didn't disappear overnight. There would be resistance from both sides. We'd need to set clear terms, Everett said finally. Boundaries, responsibilities, dispute resolution processes. This can't just be a handshake agreement that falls apart the first time someone disagrees. Agreed, Thomas said. We're willing to work out the details, whatever it takes to make this stick. And we'd need buy-in from your whole family, Rowan added. Not just the elders. If we're going to do this, everyone needs to commit. Margaret nodded. We'll make it happen. We have influence over the younger generation now that Caleb's... She paused. Now that the hotheads have been removed from the equation. It was a harsh assessment, but accurate. Caleb's arrest had created a power vacuum in the Mercer family, and the elders had stepped in to fill it. Give us a week to discuss it, Everett said, to talk to our people and make sure they're on board. Then we'll meet again and hammer out the specifics. Fair enough? Edmund stood and the others followed. Thank you for hearing us out, and Rowan, he looked at her with something that might have been pride. You did good, girl. Better than any of us had a right to expect. The words brought unexpected tears to Rowan's eyes. She'd spent so long feeling like she'd betrayed her family that hearing approval, genuine approval, felt like absolution. After the Mercers left, Rowan and Everett stood together in the sudden quiet. Did that really just happen? She asked. I think so. Everett pulled her close. You did this, you know. You made this possible. We did it together. He kissed the top of her head. Together. The week that followed was a whirlwind of meetings and negotiations. Everett gathered his ranch hands and key family members, explaining the proposal and gauging reactions. There was skepticism, plenty of it, but also cautious optimism. The younger generation especially seemed ready for change. Coleman, when informed by telegram, sent back a terse response. Your ranch, your choice. Don't screw it up. It was as close to approval as they were likely to get. The Mercers did their part, holding family meetings and slowly building consensus. It helped that Caleb's imprisonment had shaken people, made them question whether the old ways were worth the cost. When they reconvened a week later, both sides brought proposals. The negotiations were tense, detailed, sometimes heated, but they were honest, real. By the end of 3 days, they had a framework. The Hale-Mercer Alliance, they called it. A cooperative agreement that would govern shared resources, establish joint ventures, and create a council for resolving disputes without violence. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The signing happened on neutral ground, that same abandoned trading post where Rowan had met with the elders months ago. But this time, instead of suspicion and hostility, there was something that almost resembled hope. Edmund and Coleman signed first, their shaky signatures carrying the weight of 40 years of hatred being laid to rest. Then the other family heads, and finally, Rowan and Everett, their names side by side on the document. When it was done, Edmund extended his hand to Coleman. The old men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Coleman gripped Edmund's hand and shook it once, firmly. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, and in Copper Ridge, that was everything. Winter came hard that year, bringing snow to the high country and bitter winds to the valleys. But the ranch weathered it better than usual, with Mercer hands helping to secure Hale cattle and Hale equipment loaned to fix Mercer infrastructure. The alliance wasn't seamless. There were arguments over boundary disputes, disagreements about resource allocation, moments when old resentments flared up. But the council met regularly, and conflicts were resolved with words instead of weapons. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the landscape of Copper Ridge began to change. Rowan noticed it first in small ways. A Mercer cousin nodding to her in town without hostility. Hale ranch hands sharing a beer with Mercer workers at the local saloon. Children from both families playing together, oblivious to the hatred that had once defined their parents' lives. One afternoon in early spring, Rowan was checking on the new calves when Everett found her, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong." He took her hand. "I just got word from the parole board. Caleb's being released early. Good behavior." Rowan's breath caught. "When?" "Next week." A tangle of emotions hit her all at once. Relief, anxiety, hope, fear. She hadn't seen or spoken to Caleb since that day in jail. Hadn't known if he'd forgiven her, if he'd learned anything, if things between them could ever be repaired. "What are you thinking?" Everett asked gently. "I'm thinking I don't know if he'll want to see me." "Only one way to find out." Rowan nodded slowly. "Will you come with me when he gets out?" "If you want me to." "I do." Everett squeezed her hand. "Then I'll be there." The day of Caleb's release was bright and cold, the kind of spring morning that promised warmth but hadn't quite delivered. Rowan and Everett drove to the prison in Everett's truck, the silence between them comfortable but charged with anticipation. When Caleb emerged through the prison gates, he looked different. Thinner, quieter, his swagger replaced by something more subdued. He stopped when he saw them waiting. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Rowan stepped forward. "Hey. Hey." Caleb's voice was rough from disuse. "How are you?" "I've been better. I've been worse." He looked at Everett, then back at her. "I didn't think you'd come. You're my brother. Where else would I be?" Caleb's eyes glistened. "I said some things, did some things. I thought, I know what you thought." Rowan closed the distance between them. "And you were wrong. I never stopped caring about you. I just couldn't support what you were doing." "I get that now." Caleb's voice dropped. "I had a lot of time to think in there, about what you said, about building instead of destroying." He paused. "I want to try, if it's not too late." "It's not too late," Rowan said firmly. "It's never too late." She pulled him into a hug, and after a moment's hesitation, he hugged her back. When they separated, both had tears on their cheeks. Everett stepped forward, extending his hand. "Welcome back, Caleb." Caleb stared at the offered hand, conflict warring in his expression. Then slowly he took it. "Thanks," he said quietly, "for giving my sister a good life, for treating her right." "She earned it all on her own," Everett replied. "I just got lucky." On the drive back to Copper Ridge, Caleb sat in the truck bed watching the desert roll past. When they reached the crossroads where Hale and Mercer territories diverged, Rowan expected him to ask to be dropped at the Mercer Ranch. Instead, he knocked on the truck window. "Can I come see your place?" he asked when Rowan rolled it down. "I want to understand what you've built." Rowan glanced at Everett, who nodded. "Yeah," she said. "You can come see." They spent the afternoon showing Caleb around the ranch. He was quiet, observant, asking questions that showed he was actually trying to understand rather than looking for weaknesses to exploit. When they finished, they sat on the porch as the sun began its descent. "It's good," Caleb said finally. "What you've done here, I can see why you fought for it." "We're still fighting for it," Rowan said. "Every day. But it's a different kind of fight now." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'd like to help. With the Alliance, I mean. If they'll let me." "They will," Everett said. "Everyone deserves a second chance." "Even me?" "Especially you." The months that followed brought changes none of them could have predicted. Caleb joined the Alliance Council, his perspective as a former antagonist valuable in identifying and addressing potential conflicts. He worked harder than anyone to prove he'd changed, taking on the dirtiest jobs, mediating disputes with patience he'd never shown before. Slowly, the Mercer and Hale families began to function less like separate entities and more like an extended community. Joint ventures flourished. Shared resources were managed efficiently. The younger generation grew up knowing cooperation instead of conflict. And through it all, Rowan and Everett's partnership deepened into something that transcended their original agreement. They were friends, lovers, true partners in every sense. The ranch prospered under their joint leadership, becoming a model for what could be accomplished when old enemies chose cooperation over conflict. One evening, nearly a year after Caleb's release, Rowan realized she'd missed her monthly cycle. Then another. By the third, she was certain. She told Everett while they were riding fence lines, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I'm pregnant." He reined his horse to a stop so abruptly she thought he might fall off. "What?" "I'm pregnant," she repeated, her heart racing. "About 3 months, I think." Everett dismounted in a single fluid motion and pulled her down into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "We're having a baby," he whispered against her hair. "We're going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. He pulled back to look at her, and the joy in his expression answered before his words could. "Happy? Rowan, I'm—" He laughed, the sound bright and unfettered. "I'm terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I have words for." She kissed him then, there in the middle of the desert, with their horses grazing nearby, and felt a sense of completeness she'd never imagined possible. The pregnancy was hard. The desert heat was unforgiving, and Rowan's body rebelled against the changes in ways that left her exhausted and frustrated. But Everett was there through all of it, taking on extra work so she could rest, bringing her water and food when she couldn't keep anything down, sitting with her through the difficult nights. The ranch hands rallied around her too. Tom built a rocking chair for the nursery. Danny carved a mobile from desert wood. Even Ray, who'd once questioned her place on the ranch, knitted a tiny blanket in secret. When Rowan's family heard the news, they responded with unexpected warmth. Margaret sent baby clothes. Edmund wrote a letter offering advice that was surprisingly tender. And Caleb showed up one weekend with a hand-carved cradle, his face flushed with pride and nervousness. "I wanted to make something," he said. "Something that would last, something good." Rowan cried when she saw it, touched beyond words by the gesture. Coleman's response was characteristically terse. "About time. Make sure my great-grandchild knows how to ride before they can walk." But attached to the telegram was a generous check and a rare admission that he was pleased. The baby came on a cool autumn evening after a labor that lasted 14 hours and left Rowan more exhausted than any day on the ranch ever had. But when the midwife placed the tiny, squalling bundle in her arms, every moment of pain evaporated. She was perfect. Dark hair, gray eyes, lungs that could wake the dead. "What should we name her?" Everett asked, his voice thick with emotion as he sat beside the bed, one finger gently touching their daughter's tiny hand. Rowan had thought about this for months, cycling through possibilities, but in this moment, only one name felt right. "Hope," she said softly. "I want to name her Hope." Everett's eyes glistened. "Hope Hale. I like it." "Hope Mercer Hale," Rowan corrected. "Both families, both legacies, a new beginning." "Perfect," Everett whispered. "She's perfect." News of Hope's birth spread quickly through Copper Ridge. Visitors came in a steady stream, Hales and Mercers alike, bearing gifts and good wishes. Former enemies stood side by side in the ranch house, cooing over the baby who represented everything they'd fought to build. Edmund and Coleman arrived on the same day, eyeing each other warily but maintaining civility. They took turns holding Hope, their ancient faces softening as they looked at the child who carried both their bloodlines. "She's going to be trouble," Coleman predicted. "Got that stubborn Hale chin. And those sharp Mercer eyes," Edmund countered. "She'll see right through any nonsense." "Good," both men said in unison, then looked at each other in surprise. It was a small moment, but significant. Two old warriors finding common ground in a baby's face. When everyone had finally left and the house was quiet again, Rowan sat in the rocking chair with Hope sleeping against her chest. Everett sat on the floor beside them, his head resting against her knee. "We did it," Rowan said softly. "We actually did it." "We did," Everett agreed, "though I'm not sure what it is anymore." Rowan smiled. "We ended a war, built a life, created something new out of something broken." She looked down at their daughter. "We chose each other. Every day, in 100 small ways, we chose each other." "Best choice I ever made," Everett said. "Same." They sat like that for a long time. A family formed not by tradition or obligation, but by deliberate, repeated choice. Outside, the desert stretched vast and unforgiving. But inside, in the warm glow of lamplight, 3 people who represented the end of one story and the beginning of another rested peacefully. The feud that had defined Copper Ridge for 40 years was over. Not because anyone won, but because 2 people decided there were more important things to fight for, like partnership, like peace, like love. And as hope yawned and settled deeper into sleep, Rowan understood that this was the real victory. Not the alliance, not the treaties, not even the cessation of violence. The victory was this: a child who would grow up knowing both families as her own, who would never have to choose between blood and belonging, who would inherit a legacy of cooperation instead of conflict. Hope would grow up in a different world than the one Rowan and Everett had known. A world where Hales and Mercers worked together, where old wounds were healing, where the future was built on possibility rather than revenge. That was worth everything they'd endured. "What are you thinking about?" Everett asked, noting the tears on her cheeks. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," Rowan said. "From strangers at an altar to this, parents, partners, a family. No regrets." She looked at him, this man who'd started as a necessary alliance and become her home. Not a single one. Everett stood and kissed her forehead, then Hope's. "Come on, let's get you both to bed." As they made their way upstairs, Rowan glanced back at the empty main room. Tomorrow it would fill again with work and responsibility. But tonight, it stood as testament to what they'd built. Not just a house or a ranch, but a foundation for something better. Something that would outlast them both. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The desert breathed its ancient rhythm. And in a small house at the base of the canyon, 3 people slept peacefully, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, courage, and the stubborn refusal to let hatred have the final word. The story that began with a wedding no one believed in had become something no one could have predicted. Not a fairy tale. Life in Copper Ridge was too hard for that. But something more valuable. A real, messy, beautiful partnership that proved peace was possible, even in the most unlikely places. And as Hope grew, she would learn the truth her parents had discovered, that the strongest legacies aren't built on conquest or dominance, but on the daily choice to build instead of destroy, to forgive instead of condemn, to hope instead of despair. The feud was over. The future had begun. And in Copper Ridge, where hatred had once run deeper than water, 2 families had finally learned that survival meant more than just enduring. It meant choosing every single day to make something better than what came before.